My name is Karol Kozub. I work at Kozub, and today I'll be talking about Free Touch. Free Touch is an exciting new technology from Apple that allows the newest iPhone devices to measure the pressure you apply to the screen on each touch. And this allows for many new interactions and gestures. Here, for example, you have quick actions on the left. In the middle, there is view controller previewing, and there is a gesture on the right that allows you to switch between applications. So first, I'd like to say a few words about the new properties on UI Touch, namely force and maximum possible force. These allow us to get the force of the touch on the screen. The force property is normalized so that 1 represents an average touch, and maximum possible force gives some context to the first property so that we know what the scale for that one is. For some reason on my phone, maximum possible force is equal to 6 2/3. So here is an example from Apple that is an application where you can draw lines on the screen using your finger, and depending on how much pressure you apply to the screen, the lines are either thicker or thinner. Yeah, that's it for UI Touch Force. Now we'll move on to quick actions, which is one of the major new APIs regarding Free Touch. Quick actions are a set of actions that you can define in your application that allow the user to go to an action screen a lot more easily from the home screen. To activate them, you press on the application icon, then a menu with up to 4 actions appears, and after selecting the item from the menu, you go to the application for that and for the screen for that action. Application can have up to 4 such actions, and they can be added either statically through info list or dynamically in code. So first, let's talk about static quick actions. These are added through info list in your application's bundle. And to add them, you use the UI application shortcut items key, which is an array of dictionaries. Each dictionary within this array represents 1 item on the list. Here we have 6 items on the left and only 4 on the right. That's because there are 2 fields that are required. There is type and title, and here item 0 doesn't have a type, so it's considered invalid and not taken into account. Also, the 5th item just doesn't fit onto the list because there are only 4 items possible. Apart from the required fields, there are a few fields that are optional. There is subtitle, icon type, icon file, and user info. And I'll talk about them in a moment. So first, the type. It's an identifier for the action. It's not displayed in any way on the list, but can be very useful for later on handling the action itself. Then we have the title, which is the black text for each item. The subtitle, the grayish text below the title, that is optional. And we have 2 methods of creating or defining icons for the items. There is icon type, which is which allows us to select one of the built-in icons. Here, for example, we're using icon type home. And there is also icon file, which allows us to select an icon based on an asset from our bundle. It's important to note here that the asset looks like this, so it has a few more colors. The image is treated as if it was a template image, so only the alpha channel is taken into account, and the other color information is lost. Apart from that, we have the user info dictionary, which can have any custom key value mapping you want, which also can be useful when handling the application later on. Here are all the system icon types, the built-in icons. On iOS 9, there are only 7. iOS 9.1 introduced a few more. So in many cases, you don't have to draw your own icons. You can instead use the built-in ones. We can also create quick actions from code. This allows us to change the change the items during runtime. To do that, we use the shortcut items property on UI application. This is an optional array of UI application shortcut item objects, and the UI application shortcut item class looks like this. It's very similar to the dictionaries we used in InfoPlist. It again has the type and localized title, which are required, and an optional localized subtitle, icon, and user info. It's important to note here that the icon here is an object of UI application shortcut icon class instead of a string as in the InfoPlist dictionary. Right. So here is an example of, I hope it's not, the text isn't too small. Here's an example of creating a few items using this, these APIs. So first we have an item with built-in search icon. That's the first item on the right with the magnifying glass. Then we have again an item with the triangle asset. And then we have something which is new, which we couldn't use in the static approach. We have an icon created with a contact. So here I fetched a contact from the contact store. And as you can see, for the contact, we can have colors on the icon. You can also create a contact in runtime, a temporary contact that isn't saved in the contact store, but the image data in this case will be ignored. So only contacts that are actually saved in the contact store can have colored images. All the others and the contacts that don't have an assigned profile image will have just the initials and on some background. And the important thing is to assign it later on to the shortcut items array, or property, sorry. Okay, so now that we know how to create quick actions, we have to somehow handle them. To do that, we use the UI application delegates application perform action for shortcut item completion handler method, which gives us a full-blown shortcut item, which has the user info dictionary and everything we set up in either the InfoPlist or in code. It also has a completion handler, which we have to call after when we finish performing the action. And it takes a Boolean value, which we have to set to true or false, depending on whether the action succeeded or not. Right. So that's all for quick actions. Now we're moving on to pick and pop, also known as view controller previewing. This is another major API related to 3D Touch. It allows us to show a preview of a view controller by pressing hard on some view and then pushing the preview onto the navigation stack by pressing it further. Here it is in action. So by pressing one of the images, I show the preview. If I release, the preview disappears. But if I press even harder, the preview will pop into place. So here are the two classes that are needed to implement that. There is an extension on UI view controller with two methods, register for previewing with delegate and unregister for previewing with context. To have the previews, we have to first register for previewing. And the register for previewing method takes two arguments, the delegate and source view. The source view is the view from which we show the preview. It will be a lot cleaner when I show you the example in a moment. And the delegate is responsible for handling the whole process. So the delegate has two methods, view controller for location and commit view controller. And the first one is responsible for returning a view controller that will be previewed. The second one just defines whether we want to push the view controller or present it or do something like that. Right, so here is a very, very basic example of what I just said. So we have a view controller that is defined, created in a storyboard. It has a source view, and it has the register. It registers for previewing in the view.load method. It uses the source view for the registration, and it uses itself as the delegate. In the delegate methods, in view controller for location, it just returns a new instance of a previewed view controller, which is an empty view controller that is simply has some zip file associated with it. And then in commit view controller, we just say that we want to push the view controller onto the navigation stack. The commit view controller is the action that happens when you push the source view even further when the preview is shown. Here it is in action. So we have the source view, and we have some text in the background so that you can see the blurring. And when we first press the source view very slightly, there is only some blurring so that we know that this view has a preview. Then if we press harder, the preview gets displayed. And if we press even harder, the preview pops or is pushed onto the navigation stack, and we have to use the back button to go back to the original view. So here, as you can see, the two delegate methods, previewing with context view controller for location and previewing context commit view controller, both have a previewing context argument. This argument adopts the UI view controller previewing protocol, which has a few interesting properties. It has a delegate and source view, the two in the middle, which we set when we registered for previewing. But apart from that, there is a gesture recognizer which we can use to define the relations with other gesture recognizers if we use some in our in view. And there is a source rect which allows us to define which part of the source view is supposed to get focused when we press on it. So here, for example, we set the source rect as an inset bound of the source view. So we inset the source view bounds by 20 points, and I'm not sure if it's visible on the right, but when I press the source view, only the middle square gets focus, and the edges are blurred as well. So apart from that, we can return nil from the view controller for location, and this just disables previewing in this case. So both of these things, the ability to set the source rect and the ability to just return nil, allow us to do many interesting things, like, for example, in a text view, we could have some paragraphs that are previewable, and if you press anywhere that on the text view that isn't a paragraph or isn't interesting or doesn't have a preview, we would return nil. For each paragraph, we could have a source rect defined and have only that have focus. Okay, so moving on. When we show the preview, there is also a possibility to display a menu with some additional actions. So this is called pick quick actions. And the previewed view controller can override the method preview action items and return from it an array of UI preview action items. UI preview action item is a protocol which is adopted by two classes, UI preview action and UI preview action group. UI preview action has a title, style, and handler. UI preview action group has a title, style, and an actions array. So on the right, you can see an action with a default style, action with a destructive style, an action with a selected style, and an action group with default style. Here is the example in action. We define three UI preview actions with empty handlers, and we define an action group with three actions in the array, all of which are the default style action. So as you can see on the right, when we first show the preview, we swipe up to show the menu. And then after selecting the action group from the menu, we get another menu with the actions from the array defined in action group. Here, yeah. Also, we can just swipe down to hide the preview if we don't want to select any action at all. Another thing we can do is show a lot of actions, and in this case, the action menu takes up about 2/3 of the screen, and we can scroll through the actions then. So there is always a bit of context, a bit of the previous view controller visible, and yeah, the rest is scrollable. Okay, so that's pick quick actions. And the last thing I want to talk about is detecting 3D touch. So in some cases, especially when doing custom UI touch handling, you need to know whether 3D touch is enabled on the device or not. So there is a class called UI trait collection that describes many traits of the device, like screen size, etc. And among other things, it has force touch capability property that is an enumeration of 3 possible values: unknown, unavailable, and available. As you can see on the right, you can just go to the settings app, go to general accessibility 3D touch, and either disable or enable 3D touch at any point. So you cannot assume that 3D touch will be enabled throughout the life of your application. To get the UI trait collection, you need an object that adopts the UI trait environment protocol. The UI trait environment has a trait collection property and a method that can be overridden to know whether the trait collection, whenever the trait collection changes. So the trait collection did change method will be called every time the trait collection for some reason gets changed. The UI trait environment protocol is adopted by UI screen, UI window, UI view controller, UI presentation controller, and UI view. So in practically all the classes in UIKit that could use this, you already have it. So that's it for detecting 3D touch. In summary, we've talked about UI touch force, static quick actions defined in info.plist, dynamic quick actions defined in code, pick and pop, pick quick actions, and detecting 3D touch. That's it. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. It was a bit too fast, wasn't it?
In the pick and pop,
right?
There's a nice animation where it pops in.
Right.
Free access without that free touch. Can we use it programmatically without any touch? this transition when the view pops in the navigation bar?
I don't think so, but I don't know. Probably not, but I'd have to look into it.
Okay.
Probably it would have to involve some private API access, but I don't know.
And in the first half of the presentation, you were creating these items on the item, and you were specifying, here. You were specifying type as a string.
Right.
Completely user-defined, or is it set of available?
No. The type, I'm not quite sure why it's called type. I think it should be called something like identifier. It's just an identifier you can use for handling later on. So it's completely user-defined or programmer-defined, and it depends on what you use here.
The preferred way to distinguish between items in the callback?
Probably. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if free touch is so widely used that it has guidelines as to what's the preferred way of doing things. Right?
I assume that if I want to implement this pick and pop gesture, I need to explicitly set the source view, which will be reactive or pre-detached. Did you try to implement, for example, pick and pop from table view cells, something like that?
Well, you can just set the table view as the source view, and then in view controller for location, check what cell is under this location, and either return a previewed view controller for that cell, or return nil if it's between cells or something. So it's absolutely possible to do that. Yeah.
Coordinates.
It's the coordinates of the touch on this source view, right?
Okay.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I have a question about quick actions.
Right.
Can be created dynamically.
Yep.
So my question is, can they be created after? It's actually system notifying app that the user gonna use a quick action, so you can customize the menu, or you just need to use the predefined dynamically created actions. My question is, is system notifying the app before showing the menu?
No, you only get notified when a user actually selects one of the items, and then you get the application perform action for shortcut item completion handler method call. But apart from that, you just have to update the shortcut items array on the go, and you don't have control over that. And also, you don't even know if your application won't be killed while in the home screen, right? So that your application can be actually not yet launched when the menu is displayed. It can be launched in response to selecting one of the quick actions later on.
Okay, and if I have a list of quick actions defined in the playlist,
right?
Later on, I change them during runtime.
You cannot change.
Killed. What is shown?
Well, the shortcut items on UI application are completely independent of the shortcut items defined in the info list. So you don't have access to the items in info list. The items in info list take precedence. So if you have, for example, 2 items in info list, you can have 2 more items in shortcut items, and the others will be ignored. But the shortcut items array will be empty even if you have static items defined in info list. So the 2 are completely independent. I'm not sure if that answers your question. Okay. Anything else? Any questions? No? Okay. Then thank you.